Hey everybody, it's Emily Dark Schooling, and today I want to talk about the favorite movies and TV shows I watched in 2024. I don't talk a lot about TV and movies here on my channel, but that is a thing that I love. I love watching TV, I love movies, always have since I was small. So I did not watch a ton this year, honestly, but I did watch some gems. So I thought it would be fun to talk a little bit about the TV and movies that I consumed in 2024 that really stood out for me. So I want to start, I'm kind of going in order of when I viewed them, and I'm also going to have like an honorable mention for some rewatches. So I want to start with those rewatches that really stood out for me. So this year, I rewatched with Sarah, My So-Called Life, and it was so much fun. I watched that show when it aired back in like 1994, 1995, and it had such a big impact on me at the time. I was 15, so I was the same age as Angela Chase when it aired, and I remember how much I loved it. And it had been, I don't even know, at least 20 years since I had rewatched it, because I did watch that show like in reruns when it was on MTV. But that was in my teens, in early 20s. So this was my first time going back and watching it as an adult. And I loved it just as much, but I saw things so differently now than I did then. Like I remember like idolizing Jordan Catalano. I remember thinking Jordan Catalano was like the most amazing hot boyfriend, and watching it as an adult I was like, wow, he's a mess and he does not deserve Angela. So like it was super interesting kind of seeing it through different eyes, and like especially seeing the parents as an adult. I remembered being bored by Patty and Graham stuff. I did not enjoy when I was a teen. I found it a little tedious, like who cares? Let's get back to the more important story. Is Jordan and Angela gonna get together? I also really liked seeing how much like just how interesting it was to see like the 90s as a nostalgia thing now. I had so much fun rewatching this. It was great. I loved it. I think it still holds up. I think if you haven't seen it before, you might enjoy watching it now just for like the time capsule-ness of it. But also, like, if you watched it as a teen and you haven't gone back and watched it again, highly recommend. It was a good time. I also rewatched with Sarah one of my favorite movies as a kid, which I don't know what this says about me, that it was one of my favorite movies as a kid, but Crybaby by John Waters is a classic. I loved that movie so much. I don't know, like I feel like you don't consume movies like that anymore. Like I literally stumbled upon this flipping channels one time when I was like 12 and immediately became obsessed and begged my father to find it again and record it for me so I could watch it again. And I think he found it was on at like 2 a.m. one day, and he programmed the VCR to record it. So I had a recording of this and I watched it every single day for 2 years. I know that movie by heart. And I had not rewatched this in, again, like 20 plus years. So I watched it with Sarah, and honestly, still completely held up for me. I love this movie. It's so silly and so cheesy, but also just so great. This is like a Romeo and Juliet sort of a story with like the squares and the drapes set in the 1950s, and like Allison is a square, but she feels like she really is a drape, and she decides to like step out of the box that she's been put in and go on a date with Crybaby Walker, who is like the king of the drapes, and it's so fun. It's a musical. I love it. It's so much fun. Okay, so those are my rewatches that I wanted to talk about. So now let's talk about the TV and movies that I watched for the first time this season. I want to start with The Artful Dodger. I want to say this was on Hulu. It's only one season, sadly, but God, it was so good. This is a TV series, I think it's only like 8 episodes, and it's a continuation of the story of the Artful Dodger, like what happens to him after he escapes Fagin's clutches and ends up on a ship to Australia and finds a way to like make a life for himself there as a doctor. He's a brilliant surgeon. And this is, you know, when it's all very kind of experimental. And in Australia, he meets this girl who is very interested in medicine and becoming a surgeon herself. And she's not really allowed to practice the way she wants to. So she convinces him to like teach her and give her like ways to like get to live out her dreams of being a doctor. So this has everything I could possibly want in a story. We've got like Victorian London vibes because it's the Artful Dodger. We've got a girl who is obsessed with medicine and wants to be a surgeon. It's gruesome. It's really, really witty and fun. And this was like one of the best things I'd watched in a long time. And I'm so mad that we only get one season. But I think it's worth watching if you love that kind of a story. This was great. Highly recommend. We also watched Dead to Me, all 3 seasons this year. And I was curious about this show, but I didn't really know what it was. Besides, it was Christina Applegate and I wanted to see it. I loved this so much. It was so fun. It's been a long time since I watched something where I could like scream at the TV while it, and like, just so many twists and turns, and I never knew ever what was going to happen. And I love that in a show. I love when something can surprise me that much, when it can be so hilarious one minute and make me cry the next. This is such a good show. It's only got 3 seasons, but it is maybe the best tightly like written show I've ever seen. Like, there are no throwaway episodes. There is a distinct beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, I loved this so much just for how like perfect it was. Like, this is maybe one of those few perfect shows. I would love to rewatch it at some point and see, like, does it hold up to a rewatch? Because I feel like it's one of those shows that is so good because it's so surprising. So I really wonder what I'd think of it watching it a second time. But this is a show about a friendship and the way it evolves through very strange circumstances. And I can't really tell you more than that because I feel like everything's a spoiler. So this is something you should go into knowing as little as possible. I watched We Were the Lucky Ones. I heard about this, immediately read the book because I knew I wanted to read the book first and then watch the show. This is a true story about a family that survives World War II and like how they were able to do so. And it was really well done. Like, I actually think, and you won't hear me say this very often, but I actually think I like the show just a little bit more than the book, but like just a little bit. Like, they're both equally amazing and I recommend both, but I really liked the show. I think it did a really good job portraying what life was like in that time and place. And it did a really good job of like really immersing you in the story of these characters and making you care about all of them. And sometimes with an ensemble like that, you find yourself really wanting to see more of this one person's story and not so much of this. Like, I felt like all of them were really well fleshed out and really interesting. This was great. I highly recommend it. My husband and I watched The Boys. I knew that this show existed but didn't really know what it was, and I was so burned out on superhero stuff after like getting really into Marvel. After we watched Infinity War and Endgame, I was just kind of over it. So when I saw this with superheroes, I just ignored it. And so I kept hearing people talk about it and decided maybe it's worth watching an episode, maybe two, just to see what we think. And we ended up binging the entirety of all 4 seasons within like a month. So we got really hooked on it. It was weird. Again, a show where I think the less you know, the better, because there's so much weird. I will say this is not for everyone because it's super gory, super graphic. There were some things that I will never unsee, and I don't know what it says about me that I enjoyed that. Yeah, but it's super fun. This is one of those like turn your brain off shows because you don't have to think. It's super weird and goofy and wacky, and I just enjoyed it for that. So I gotta put it on my list because it really did, like, we got really immersed in that for a little while. And it was a good time. I don't know how to describe the show. It's like, what if the superheroes were the bad guys and a group of ragtag people have to kind of try to dismantle this organization of superheroes? That's about it. That's the best synopsis I can give you. And I don't know, it was a good time. It was really fun. There are some really great characters in this show, and it had some really great moments overall, and I had a really fun time watching it. Probably my favorite thing I watched all year was The Rings of Power. I had watched the first season last year, really liked it, and was so curious to see what they were going to do this year. And so I rewatched season 1 right before season 2 aired, so we were like reminding ourselves what was happening. Season 2 of Rings of Power was the best, I don't know, was it 10 episodes? The best 10 weeks of TV the whole year. Like, I have never felt so much joy watching something before. Like, if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, I think you should definitely watch this. This has really great casting, really great storytelling. This is sort of like in the time between the Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings. This is telling like the prologue of Lord of the Rings, where they're talking about how Sauron rose to power, created the rings, and started a war with all of Middle-earth. Like, this, that's what this is about. This is the prologue. And it is so fascinating to watch because there's so much, like, Easter eggs and stuff. Like, the number of times I gasped and shrieked and cried watching this season, it's beautifully done. Like, it is gorgeous to look at. And it's such a good, like, immersive experience watching all this little stuff. Like, Tom Bombadil gets to be in. Like, we finally get to see Tom Bombadil. You get to see, like, the origin of the hobbits. You get to see an Entwife. There's so much backstory to things that were just like a blip in Lord of the Rings that, I could talk about it all day. But it's beautiful and such great casting, such great storytelling, such great acting. Like, I loved it. I loved it so much. I am such a Lord of the Rings nerd anyway, and this just fed my soul this year. And I cannot wait to see what they do next. A great movie. I haven't talked about movies yet. A great movie we watched was No One Will Save You. I think this is on Hulu. I knew this had something to do with aliens, but that's all I knew going in. And again, I don't want to tell you too much because like the less you know, the better, but this was really well done and there's like no dialogue. This is almost entirely done with silence and like music and sounds. No talking. The entire film. I think there's maybe like 2 words said the whole movie. And if you told me that before I put it on, I might not have wanted to watch it because I would have been like, oh, that sounds like it's a gimmick. But it's really good. Like, The storytelling that they were able to do just through her facial expressions alone was amazing. Caitlin Deaver's a fascinating actor to watch. Like, she's brilliant, and the way she was able to tell this story without speaking was fascinating to watch. It was beautiful. This was, I thought, going to be like a kind of fun horror movie, and it was, but I don't know that I would really... Horror is such a weird genre to try to classify because it can span so many different things. So yes, I'm pretty sure this does qualify for horror, but it's also sci-fi, but it's also a really beautifully done emotional story about grief. And that's all I want to say about it, because I feel like that's all you really need to know. We also watched Woman of the Hour with Anna Kendrick, which is a movie about a serial killer. And I had never heard of this before, but apparently the serial killer was able to get on that dating show and almost killed the contestant that was on the show, you know, to go on the date with her. And I'd never heard of that before. And so I was curious, and I love Anna Kendrick, so I wanted to watch it, and it was really, really well done. Like, I'm clearly not a movie person. I'm not able to, like, tell you all the cinematography stuff, but, like, the acting was really, really good. Like, the guy that they cast to be the serial killer was so creepy, but also very charismatic. So I can see how, like, they were able to, like, get sucked into his story, but also he was super creepy. The way it all played out, where like they're bouncing through time to show you like who he was and the women that he'd killed and how he ended up on this dating show, and Anna Kendrick's the contestant on the show who has to decide between the three guys, you know, and her story and how this all intertwined. I thought the movie was done really, really well. I'm not always a big fan of things like this because I think they can be exploitative, but I think they did a really good job with focusing on her story and like how she was here, the story of the survivor. I thought it was really good. I definitely recommend checking it out. And then I think my favorite movie of the year is where I'm gonna end. and that was Alien Romulus. I had been so excited for this. I'm a big fan of the Alien franchise. I got Robbie really into it, and so Robbie and I watched all the Alien movies a couple of years ago, so we were both excited to see Alien Romulus. I thought about going to the movie theater, but to be fair, I hate going to the movie theater. It's not a good experience for me ever. I always end up with a really bad headache afterwards, and I just didn't want to do that. So we waited until it was out streaming on Hulu. And we watched it like the day it came out. And it was worth the wait. It was so fun. This was a great addition to the franchise, I thought. It's set like in between the first two movies, which I did not realize. And I thought the way they set that up was really interesting. And I had such a fun time watching this. I don't know, I thought it fit really well. There was only one thing that I didn't like about it, and I really think they could have done it better without. And I feel like it's kind of a spoiler to say what it is, but if you've seen it, you probably know what I'm talking about. I think that they could have left that whole thing out, and it still would have tied in well enough without having to do that. But other than that, I thought the actors were great. The effects were so good. It was really gross, really graphic. Loved all of that. It was just so much fun. I had such a good time. We sat and just like shouted at the TV a bunch. It was a good time. So I had so much fun watching that. So those are my favorite movies and TV shows of the year. Let me know down below in the comments if you watched any of these, what you thought of them, what was your favorite movie or TV show, or both, of 2024. I'd love to know. Let me know down in the comments and we can chat. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.